11:30, party time. What's up, Philly? What up? Yeah, I bet you're all wondering, and yes, I had a cheesesteak last night, and it was delicious. I went to Jim's. I got it with the whiz, like they do out here. It was very good. Yeah, and I'm here to talk about React Native. My name's Ken Wheeler. That's me on Twitter. You guys should pull up your phones and follow that right now. Even if you're not into JavaScript, it's only like 10% JavaScript. The rest is antics, thorough antics. I work at a company called Formidable. They're a Seattle-based consultancy where we do work for companies like Walmart and Starbucks. Really just a lot of high-level JavaScript. But I live in New Jersey and work from New Jersey because I'm an HR liability. Yeah. And I'm here to talk about React Native. So for those of you who don't know what React Native is, I'm going to clue you in. It's a framework for writing native apps with JavaScript. So it's based on Facebook's React library, where you're doing that on the web. And it targets multiple platforms with the same code. Right? So you might be asking, how is this different from existing solutions, things like Cordova or what have you? It's not HTML. So a lot of the time when you have these hybrid solutions, it's a web view, it's running HTML, sometimes it has native hooks and bridging. This is real UI. It feels like a native app, acts like a native app because it is a native app, despite being driven by JavaScript. Right? So before I get into that, I want to talk about React itself. So React is a library for building UI with JavaScript, right? And at the core, right, it's not even about the library, it's about the component model, it's about the idea and the paradigm where you have UI being a function of data. It's a very different way for UI programming than that has traditionally been the case. Up until this point, we sit there with jQuery, you render something with some templates, and then you're like, set the JavaScript loose on it, like, hey, yeah, let's find that div that we just rendered. But that's not the case here with, is somebody really calling me right now? Jesus. Sorry, the buzzing, I can't talk with the buzzing. Yeah, so there's no finding your elements with React. You know where your elements are because you're the one rendering them. It's not like, hey, the server rendered this, and then we're going to find this and operate on it, right? Now I'm going to talk a little bit about that component model and why it's dope. This is a React component. If you've never seen this before, this probably looks nuts, right? So you have a JavaScript class that's extending the React component base class. And the most important thing, the absolute prerequisite for any React component is that render function there. And then it's returning what looks like HTML in your JavaScript. It's not HTML. It's representative of HTML, but that's actually not HTML. You're using a syntax transform after the fact to transform that to something I'm going to show you in a second. Down here, you have ReactDOM, which is decoupled from React itself. And ReactDOM then takes this, and it'll render it, the second argument being where you want it rendered, which will be your React root. Right? Again, I was saying before about how it transforms the syntax in a compile step. That HTML, which is actually JSX is what it's called, it desugars to this right here, which is React create element. The first argument there is H1, which is your element type. The second blank argument there, that's just an empty object, is your props, which I'll talk about in a second. And then the third one is the children, which is title. So you're going to render an H1 tag, and inside of that, it'll be this.props.title, right? So let's talk about props. In the React component model, your prop is your external API, right? So if you have your heading component, right, you use your uppercase, and you set it up just like an HTML tag, and the prop is essentially the equivalent of like a HTML attribute. But what's different is, if you use an HTML attribute, you have to like JSON stringify things, everything like that. This is not the case, right? This is just desugared JavaScript. So for here, you could pass in whatever you want. Objects, callback functions, right there. There's no stringification or anything. The second thing that makes them kind of dope is state. Right? So here's a little bit more involved one that has some state to it. So on the heading component, right, we can define an internal state property, which is an object. It's always an object, but we're going to set count to 0. Right? And here we have a function increment, and inside of there we're going to set the state to a new object, where the count is the count incremented. Then down here in the render, right, we have a button, and then you have on click. Don't let that scare you. I thought when I first saw that, I was like, I thought we don't do this anymore, but it's not that. It's an event system under the hood that handles that. And then you have this.state.count there, right? So rather than directly modifying that, right, we have that manual setter set state, and what that does is it tells the component now it's time to update. So anytime set state gets called, anytime you click that, the internals of this component is then going to set that state, and it's going to be a signal to call render again. So you click the button, and then the label on the button is 1, 2, 3, 4. So state's an important concept there. And then really the kicker, what is probably one of my favorite parts of the React component model, is lifecycle methods. You can see here just a collection of a couple of them, but like native views or something in iOS, you have hooks into the different lifecycle stages of the component. Things like component will mount, component did mount, component will unmount. Right? For example, like in component did mount, you could say, like, when this component mounts, I want you to go and fetch some data from an API and then populate this component with it. Or in component will mount, you can add an event listener for something like on the window, and then if you want to clean it up, component will unmount. That's where you destroy that event listener. All right. So ReactDOM is what takes that React class and turns it into DOM. Right? So the rendering is abstracted to a separate package, and this is important. Right? You have the core library that you can define these classes with, but the actual rendering of it is completely abstracted. The components are just wrappers, and then in the event of ReactDOM, it's going to render HTML primitives as a result. It's also going to handle the DOM environment, so there's also bootstrapping. So when you do render something to the DOM, ReactDOM itself actually has a couple different things where it's going to handle events behind the scenes. It's going to set everything up. And you don't have to worry about doing any of that. So let's head back to React Native for a second. This is a React Native component. It doesn't look too different, but it is, right? You see view and text there. You don't see any HTML. That's because there's no DOM in native apps. You don't have any H1s or paragraphs or buttons, right? Your base primitives in React Native are view and text. There's also no CSS in native apps. Or is there? So in React Native, they actually came up with a CSS system, right? You can import style sheet here, and you can define style sets here with regular CSS. If you're used to writing CSS in the browser, you just do it in JavaScript object format, which if you were setting it with JavaScript anyway, you'd be familiar with using. And then you can just apply it right there with the style attribute. And behind the scenes, what that's going to do is, if you're in iOS, right, it'll take like margin and color, and it'll map to those properties on the native view using CSS. They also created a layout system porting over Flexbox from the web for the constraints. You might be wondering how this actually works, right? So this is how React Native actually works behind the scenes. You have 3 threads, right? The one at the top there, the shadow queue, that just does layout calculations. It's like a worker thread. The main business is between these 2 characters right here. You have your JavaScript thread, right? And that's going to interpret your React JavaScript and figure out what needs to happen, right? And then via an asynchronous bridge, you have your main thread where it's going to draw the native stuff, right? So your JavaScript is going to determine what is going to happen in your native app, and then the native app makes that happen natively, right? So if you say there's a view in your JavaScript, it hollers via the asynchronous bridge, and then it just draws it dynamically. And that's how you're able to write these apps in JavaScript, but have native UI, right? So view and text don't always cover everything. Different platforms have, different UI elements, different, different things that, aren't easily expressed. So React Native actually comes with a ton of built-in stuff here. Anything you could imagine, things like the native date picker, map views, scroll views and virtualized lists, things like that. As far as the APIs that are built in that are non-UI, you have access to all kinds of things. Action sheets and alerts. You get screen dimensions, geolocation, almost anything you can imagine as far as device capabilities is exposed here. And this is just a subset. This is what I could screenshot and put on a slide. There's at least like a finger scroll, 2 or more, of what they actually expose. And if something there doesn't cut it, you have what's called native modules. And this is my favorite part about React Native. Up until this point, it's like, hey, cool, you make these apps, it's fun. But what about perf? What about prod? What about when you have to, my company does this special thing, how about that? That's where native modules come in. So the bridging system in React Native is probably the best I've ever used. Here is an Objective-C class here. You use macros. I know, relax. You say RCT export module and then RCT export method. And what this does is it makes the asynchronous bridge from the JavaScript to this native code available. Right? So if I say RCT export method say name, and then here I'm going to log out the name argument, down in JavaScript, down on the native modules right here, now my module is available and the say name method, and it's callable via JavaScript. So via this bridging, if you aren't scared to get your hands dirty with native code, or you have a talented native engineer in your team, there isn't anything that a React Native app can't do. Just how bad you actually want to do it. So between what they have built in, what the community provides, which is huge these days, and native modules, there's not a whole lot that you can't do in native apps with React Native. Okay? So as a developer, why would you use this? First off, you have an access to the robust ecosystem of JavaScript utilities. Right? There's a lot of libraries in the native sphere, but for JavaScript, there's all kinds of things. You have things like D3 or Moment, all kinds of JavaScript libraries that you can then use and apply to native code that wouldn't be available prior. The other thing that's nice is targeting multiple platforms with one language and the developer experience. And that's what I mean by developer experience. If you've ever developed a native app before, right? You've probably sat around waiting for things to build. I wrote my first native app a couple years ago, and I was sitting there during developing it, trying to make it work and look how I wanted to. And I'm sitting there waiting on these builds. I called up my brother, who's hotshot mobile app director guy at startup. Right? I hit him up. I'm like, what do you guys even do while this stuff's building? He's like, yeah, ping pong mostly. But yeah, it's brutal. Coming from the web where you get instant feedback, right? We're like children. We're like, doing the builds. I'm like, this is ridiculous. So what's really nice about React Native is, first of all, you have live reload. Right? So if you edit anything non-native code, you don't have to rebuild. You can get a live reload. It'll reload the whole app. But then these rascals go ahead and take it a step further. And that's hot reload, right? Where it keeps the state. So if you've ever worked on an app where the feature you're working on is behind auth or behind 2 forms, you're sitting there, you're like, if I type this zip code one more goddamn time, to get to this next page, the hot reload is fantastic, right? Because it updates it right in place. You've already entered your zip code, and it's like, hey, I'm on this page, let's just hot reload it. And further, you can debug in Chrome, which is fantastic. So you can set breakpoints in Chrome with the dev tools. You can get your console logging. It's fantastic. I'm going to show you a little example here of, this is a live reload, right? When I change that, it just reloads it right there to Ken's awesome demo. Now we can go, let's kill that live reload. Let's turn on hot reloading. All right, it's going to start it up, the hot reload server. Right? Now I can come in here. Let's see Ken's super awesome demo. Right in place, didn't even reload. Just magically updates. You go here, you could change the background color to my favorite color, and then back. But yeah, the speed with which you're working is incredible. You're incredibly productive compared to what you were doing prior. So that's cool for the developers, but why as a business would you let the developers use this insanity? So if you're a large company and you have an iOS app and an Android app and a web presence, which a lot of people do, you probably have 3 teams here. You have an iOS team, an Android team, and a web team. You could just have a team. One team. One big old team. You know, they know a little bit of JavaScript, a little bit of this and that, some Objective-C and Java. And that team can work on everything, right? And that's, organizationally, that's huge, right? Not just because, you know, it's cohesive, but you know, it's a lot of the organizations where I've worked, they had small, like mobile teams, but you know, billions of JavaScript developers. So you know, if you have a feature that needs to go out and you just don't have the manpower for it, you know, if this stuff is written in JavaScript that everyone's used to writing, you know, you got it right there. Your resources are right there. Your resource pool expands exponentially. So you have, you know, one team, one language, and multiple targets. Further, it's a fast development cycle. You know, you can push stuff out like super quick. You have a shared code base. A lot of the code can be used between the web, Android, and iOS. You know, it's not, the goal isn't to, you know, have the same exact code base work in all those places, right? But a lot of it can, right? You know, you have different platform-specific things. You know, you're on Android, you know, you have something material, you have elevation or something. You're on iOS, you know, you don't have drawer layouts like Android. So obviously there's going to be some differences, and they have, you know, awesome ways of mitigating that, you know, with different platform-specific switches. But you get a lot of code reuse and a lot of core modules that you can update, and it'll work across all of them. And as a business, the most important thing, in my opinion, is you can deploy critical updates instantly. I'll tell you how that works. It's called code push, right? So you bundle your JS bundle locally, right? And you can deploy it over the air to users, right? So when your app is written in React Native, you can deploy that over the air. You get to skip the App Store, right? I work for some companies where we had some issues with mobile apps, right? You know, say you push up something and it's the wrong price, right? And you have to wait, what, like a week, 2 weeks maybe, to get that updated. You know, you could lose absurd amounts of money, and that's not a theoretical. That happened. So, you know, having the ability to fix something like that, either a critical vulnerability or, you know, a hole in the pocket, so to say, that's invaluable to a company that's working at scale with, you know, a lot of money. And so in the spirit of honesty, I'll tell you what sucks about it. It simply cannot beat native apps on performance. So an optimized React Native app can beat an unoptimized native app. But if you have two talented engineers, one of which is optimizing a native app, one of which is optimizing a React Native app, the native app's going to win because you're not interpreting JavaScript. Doesn't mean React Native's slow, but you know, it's just not going to be that fast. It can't beat it ever. Embedding into existing applications is also kind of tough, right? And I've had to do that like twice or thrice now. You know, it's a weird story where you have a regular native app and then you have to push up a section of it as React Native. You know, there's not really a lot of documentation out there around it. We've done our best to mitigate it, but you know, it's rough. And churn, right? You know, in the JavaScript world, we're a bunch of crazy people changing things all the time, pushing out the new hotness. So updates have been historically difficult with React Native because it's like a 2-week release cycle at this point. So you know, you guys hang out, build something for a month, and you come back, and it's like, whoa, you know, we skip 2 versions and all these different things. But it's gotten a lot better now. They addressed the update thing very recently, where updates are a little bit less painful. You know, they have code mods and you know, different CLI-based update mechanisms. But you know, I'd be lying if I said that, you know, stuff doesn't still break as a result of an update, and you have to tend to it. So to the topic of the talk. Why should we bet on React Native, right? I'm of the opinion that the React Native API is the perfect API, right? With the view and the text, right? I think that's great. There's a library out there called React Primitives, and what that does is it's view and text and, you know, a couple other APIs, but it's for the web and it's for other things, right? It's one set of renderables with multiple targets and normalized APIs, okay? So rather than try and polyfill the DOM to native, right? Polyfill the DOM to Android and iOS. You already have Android and iOS, and view and text are awesome. So we just polyfill the web, and anywhere else it's going to go. So when I was talking about code sharing before, if you use React primitives, which automatically selects the right renderable based upon the platform, if you construct your apps with view and text in this way, then you can share a whole lot more between your web and both mobile apps. Okay? And in my opinion, it's pretty future-proof, at least compared to a lot of the things that I've worked with. And I'll tell you why. Because that rendering is abstracted, right? If a new platform comes out, you can just write a renderer for it. Right now, we handle iOS and Android. You could do, actually, for all the things that you can render right now, you have iOS, Android, web, Windows, Apple TV, Xbox you can render to. You can render to hardware, so you can use React components to do Arduino component board stuff. I made a thing that renders to music. I wrote a renderer that you can render an analog synth. My buddy wrote a thing where you can render Electron applications with it. Anything that you can describe with these tags, you can create a renderer for. So if some new thing, we have React VR, right? Any new thing comes out, you can write a renderer for it. Also, it's open source. There's no lock-in. So if you have a specific need or there's any problem, you could just fork it, do your own thing. And most importantly is your knowledge investment remains sound. And what I mean by that is, no matter what you're doing with it, it's still the same React. It's just the same React. I remember I thought Angular 1 was pretty cool. I enjoyed it. Not as cool as React, but it was cool. And then Angular 2 came out, and they were like, hey, you went ahead and learned this whole Angular 1 API? Well, I'll tell you what, out the door with it. We're going to do this new thing. And I'm like, what? I just spent so much time learning that. And that's not going to happen with React, right? I mean, there'll be a little bit of churn, a little bit of differences, but not major complete dumping of your knowledge investment there. So no matter what you're rendering to in the future, as long as you understand the core paradigm of React, you're going to be all right. There's even speculation. Right now, they're working on a thing called Reason ML, right, which is a JavaScript-y syntax extension on top of OCaml. And they're writing React in it. So there's Reason React. So the future of React might not even be in JavaScript. You're using the React paradigm with React components that look like JavaScript, but it's actually an OCaml and presumably could render to GL, which would be. So speaking of the future, and I'm going to stop right here and explain myself for a second. I got a call Saturday night. Not a call. I got an email. This is 2017. And they were like, how would you like to talk on Tuesday? I was like, I would love to. So I took this on pretty short notice, and they were like, yeah, you want to talk about React Native? I was like, sure, yeah, we'll talk about React Native. But to give a talk in that short of time frame, I wanted to talk about something that I'm passionate about. And if you've ever seen me on Twitter, I'm passionate about talking crap. So the last half of this talk is a little bit of a turn, but it's some crap talking, and we're all going to have to deal with that. So I'm just going to go ahead and say it. The mobile web is unfit for the needs of today's application developers. It's not even worth developing for. It's a terrible experience. And native apps are actually a mess too, in my opinion. Let me explain myself. All right? So what's wrong with the mobile web? Okay. It's a hard fact. The DOM will never be fast enough to compete with native. Right? We're writing apps for what was originally a research document engine, right? It's like writing apps on like VB script and Microsoft Word or something. It's ridiculous. And the web is crippled. We don't have any access to native APIs. Google's trying, and they're trying with progressive web apps. But what are progressive web apps, right? They're webs that they work offline, which is great. That's a good step. And that's the thing that tickles me kind of funny in that respect, because it's like they're like, hey, we're going to make these mobile apps. They're going to be as good as regular phone apps. Well, how we're going to do it? We're going to make them work offline. It just does nothing for me, because most of the apps that I use they're completely worthless offline. You know, I was on a plane and they didn't have Wi-Fi, and my phone sat in the front pocket the whole time. I was sitting there watching movies. You know, most of these apps, you know, if they're not online, you know, what am I doing? What am I going to look at old Twitter updates? You know, and then, you know, the other things are, you know, they load quickly, or they appear to load quickly through trickery. You know, and they try and be data sensitive, right? Which is cool. Don't get me wrong. But they're still using the DOM, and they still don't feel like native apps. Right? You know, they have some advantages, right? You know, that's, I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, optimizing for, you know, data and making it small and everything, that's great stuff. But, you know, they're not native apps. That's not a qualifier for a native app. They're still using the DOM. DOM animation is slow. I got better, and so I've been in the game for a minute. Way back in the day, I was a Flash developer, right? I got better animation performance on like an eMachine's desktop computer like 10 years ago using Flash, using ActionScript 2 than I get on the web today on a MacBook Pro. DOM gesture recognition is not even close to what you should have if you want to compete with apps. App gesture recognition is out of control. On the web, it's like, you know, I wrote a fairly popular carousel library, and, you know, trying to get like I'm like, what is this? The gestures are not there. And DOM layout in general, you know, not even animation. You know, DOM layout, you know, if you're rendering a bunch of different things, it's just slow. You can't make Instagram on the web. Right now, if we said, hey, I want a one-to-one copy of Instagram on the web, right, with all the new hotness, you know, we could turn on all the experimental flags in Chrome. It's not happening. We're not there. You can't do it. It's not going to feel like it. It's not going to act like it because it's not there. It's crippled. So, you know, I've sat here and talked shit about the web. What's good about it? It's open. And that's the best thing, is that it's completely open. Okay, I'm going to do it. It's open, it's open, it's open, it's open. It is. Also, discovery, right? It's kind of hard to find apps. You know, have you been in the App Store lately? It's disgusting. On the web, you know, that you search anything. You look. I'm not going to pull up my Google search history here, but no, just not the one in Safari. It's my shenanigans browser. There's nobody who's going to open it. Distribution, right? On the web, I could push a website out right now. Right now. If you guys give me 45 seconds, I could close this, I can open up a terminal, I could, you know, Vim and index it HTML, I could deploy it to Surge, and then there, that's how quick this distribution is. I could do it in under a minute, right? And that agility is nowhere near there on native. And more importantly, freedom and control, right? It's open. It's an open web. You can do whatever you want. You make any website about anything you want at any time, and nobody can say a damn thing about it, except for your hosting provider if you're doing something super weird. But I mean, generally speaking, you're in the clear. So right, I've said some bad things about the web, despite being a primarily web guy. So let's see what's wrong about apps. Right? People don't download many apps. I haven't downloaded an app in like 3 months. Not even. You know, I like downloaded an app that I had previously deleted so that I could get like a barcode to get onto an airplane or something. But yeah, I don't download apps like that. I spend my time in Facebook and Twitter. Discovery. Right? Back to the App Store. You guys been in the App Store lately? Looked around, done a search in the App Store? You would think that the app for getting other apps would work better. It doesn't. Corporate overreach. Just like, you know, the things that, like, you know, when you're an app developer, you're like, oh man, I hope Apple doesn't shut this down. Like, it's ridiculous that you should be scared of that. And distribution, which is why I'm sitting here talking about React Native for the most part, because, you know, it circumvents the App Store. It's that bad that, you know, we're creating technology to circumvent it. So let's look at a couple infographics. I know people like charts and infographics. This is installs per month. People, on average, you know, even people who, you know, play Candy Crush, I'm not judging, but, you know, these people who do these sort of things, you know, one app, a little over one app a month, people install, right? If you're an app developer, you know, how do you feel about breaking into that, being that one app? You know, and then we look at like where time's spent, right? They're on social networking, which is hilarious, right? because they're spending most of their time in Twitter and Facebook. But I think this is a false stat on the basis that half the time these social platforms are used to aggregate web data, and then they have their own built-in web browsers inside of there. So they're actually spending more time on the web, right? But it's via the context of this app, so it just looks like everybody's on Facebook the entire time. And you look at audience here, apps versus web, right? The mobile web has a way, way, way bigger initial audience, because of discovery, because people can get to it, right? So if you have your mobile web there, people are just, the audience is crazy. But as far as retention, as far as people continuing to use it, right, it drops off big time for the mobile web because the experience sucks. And the app experience is good and cohesive, right? So people use the app because it's good. They go to the website and they're like, bah. It's like, and then like the companies who like, they get put the open in app at the bottom because they know the website. People don't even want to use it. They just want to use the app. But they put in the open the app because they can't discover the app otherwise if they hadn't gone to the website. Right? Again, talked crap about apps. Let's see what's good about them. Right? They feel better. They downright feel better. It's better UI. It's a more cohesive experience. And they can do more. Right? You're on a mobile website, it just can't do that much. If you want to do anything non-trivial other than, fetch a list and display it, right? You're going to want an app, right? So where am I going with this? I'm sitting here bashing what puts food on my table. We need a new kind of browser. And we've needed it for a long time. Right? Imagine if we could have the distribution, discovery, openness, and audience of the web with the capabilities, power, and finesse of native apps. Ladies and gentlemen, we need an app browser. We need it now. And React Native has the perfect API for this, right? So let's chat about how this would work real quick. The browsers implement a common bridged API for their platform, right? So depending on what platform you're on, you'll bridge over the certain things to a common API. And it's not hard. I do this all the time. If we have a thing like a map view that we're doing, like a custom map view, right? It's, I'm the guy who has to write that component, and you go and you write some Objective-C code, have a normalized API, expose it, and then you come over here on the Java side, and you expose it. You have one prop or two here or there where it's a platform-specific thing, but generally speaking, you could find middle ground, right? Instead of getting the HTML, running it to the DOM, you get a JS bundle, routes, and a semantic map. Right, so that you have an idea how to get around this as if it was a website. You have search metadata that you can use to, not just that, but for accessibility too, things like screen readers. And then you just run the app, right? So for this to be successful, you'd want to do things like expose monetization or payment APIs, right? The companies that provide these app platforms get 33% on every app sold, so why would they, put that in the browser for free? They don't have to, right? They could just shift the payment to the web, where you can pay for it there, and then you're good to go. Instead of bundling assets, right? A lot of the time you'll see like the website's like 200 kilobytes, and then your app is like 150 megabytes, right? Instead of bundling the assets, right, just download them progressively and cache them as you need them. Right, rather than this 150 megabyte single download. And then what would be really cool, which is interesting, right? They already have like deep linking kind of in apps, but actually have apps that work off of a URL with actual routing, right? So you could hop to it, you can go, back and forth. You could still have your stack and everything like that, but have the internals of apps work a little bit more like the web. That'd be great, right? So what if I told you that this sort of exists now? There's a thing that you can do, and it's called Expo, formerly Exponent. This is the best thing since sliced bread. I really enjoy it. So what you do is you have a phone app that you download. You scan a QR code, right? And this is a development environment. It basically does what I was just talking about. It has all these common bridged APIs. It's all set up. And then on your side, you have an XDE, like this developer app that'll set it up for you. It loads JS bundles from your QR code or these exponent URLs, and you could develop right there on the device. You don't need Xcode to build and test your iOS thing on device. You don't need the Android SDK You don't need that, 85 billion gigabyte download, sorry, to develop right on your phone, right? Not just that, not only do they have the base React Native stuff, but also built in are things like social APIs, barcode scanner, SVG, which bridges to core graphics. So you write SVG, but you're actually getting native graphics with that, which is bananas. OpenGL. They actually personally developed the OpenGL one, right? Where they actually wrote cross-platform OpenGL bindings that you can use in your app, and it's crazy. And video, which is a huge one, which is not actually built into the core, oddly. And they have this thing called Snack, right? So if you're a developer and you want to try out React Native like really quickly, all you need to do is download the Expo app from the App Store on your Android or iOS. And this is, you talk about a frictionless experience, right? You open up snack.expo.io, right? The first thing you see is this QR code. You take your Expo app and you scan this, right? Then it's basically JS Fiddle or CodePen or what have you. It's just online editor. And you edit right here, right in your browser, and the app on your phone updates live. Right? So you could try this out. You can create little examples, send them to your friends. I'll show you a funny one that I did later. Yeah, it's like a really great way to get started. Really, you don't have to commit to much to get it going. And it also opens up possibilities for things like this library that we built called Apper. Right? At Formidable, we do a lot of React Native dev. A lot of it is just JavaScript, so we're able to do this. What Apper does is, if you have a PR against the build for a React Native app, it'll go ahead and it'll build it, and then provide this QR code here, and you can scan it and you can check out your test build. Right? So if I'm sitting here looking at this code and I want to be sure that I give the thumbs up on it, I could just scan that and I could check it out and say, yeah, it's legit. So that's a huge win, right? Really, really, really frictionless, fun stuff. So the next step for all of this, in my opinion, is getting this technology into browsers or getting company sign-on. And then getting developer buy-in, which shouldn't be hard because the experience is dope. And then the most important thing is building awesome things with it. People aren't going to want to use it unless they see other people doing cool things with it, at which point they're like, hey, look at that, he's doing cool stuff. I can do cool stuff too. And then one doesn't have to win or the other. They can both win. And you could still have your apps. You could still have your web. But no longer will there be this competition. All right. That's all I got. Where did I come in time-wise? Yeah, about. Huh? I'm doing good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Last time for questions.
Yeah. All right. Question time.
Sweet.
Have you had a client that had a React, just regular React application already and asked you to port it over to React Native? And if you did, what solution did you use to solve that?
I did. And actually what we ended up using, so the actual UI, there was big design differences between the two. Different enough that we didn't want to port over like the whole layout components and everything like that. But what we did keep was the data layer. Are you familiar with Redux?
Yeah.
So we had a pretty complicated Redux setup and all like the asynchrony and what have you, and that was completely reusable. So we had a couple things like component-wise, like one-off things, but as far as the layout, we pretty much reconstructed the layout for native because it was so different. Like the designs on Android and iOS were so different from one another and the web, but we actually saw tons of reuse with Redux.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, which is cool. Yeah, that's the tough stuff.
Could you say a little more about what portion of the examples you showed is like compiled to native ahead of time versus what's interpreted at runtime and how that relates to the over-the-air updates?
Yeah. So if you create a native module, remember I was showing you before the custom Objective-C stuff? If you change one of those, you have to do a hard update to the App Store. Once those are in the build, if you're just changing the React code, then you can go over the air. So everything that I showed that wasn't Objective-C is completely doable over the air, and that runs interpreted. Yeah, it's not traditionally compiled, so to say. I mean, it's bundled, and minified, and optimized, but it's not like compiled. It's still interpreted at runtime. But the native modules themselves, if you do any kind of Objective-C or Java, and that's changing, you're going to have to do a full app rebuild. That's the sort of thing that you're going to have to actually push an update out.
I've got the mic. Two quick questions. You mentioned the bridging. Is that two-way bridging, or is it just React to native? Or does it go the other way as well?
It's two-way.
Two-way, okay.
Yeah, so you could have callbacks on either side.
Okay, cool. And I'm assuming you have passed this through both the Android store and the Apple store without any problems?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Actually, the one problem I did have was the Apple store, and it's because I left lorem ipsum text somewhere.
Oh, okay.
And they're like, you can't do that. I'm like, really? Like, I get it, but like, hell of a reason to fail somebody.
Thanks. Awesome presentation.
Thanks, bro.
I had a question sort of about like how quickly like the React Native team has been to make updates to React Native to support, I guess, the newer versions of Android and iPhone, and also if you could speak about like what are the like. Is there talk about like if the React Native team would stop development, like what would happen to React Native apps? Because it would be there would have to be work to get those apps to come to work on the newest versions of Android and iPhone.
Yeah. So to the first part, they're a pretty ridiculously quick dev team. They're constantly working on it, constantly improving it, and from everything that I've seen, they're super responsive. And I think they're always like a step ahead of the game. So they're pretty bleeding edge most of the time. So they keep up with new versions pretty well, at least at this point. Early on, the Android story was a little weird. But now, it's actually funny, like I think like at least on like the native side, there's actually a heavier balance of Android folk. So that experience is actually starting to get almost better than the iOS experience. As far as if Facebook, a company, stopped working on it, well over half of the contributors to React Native are community. People who don't work at Facebook at all. So if for any reason Facebook, were like, it would get forked immediately. And, there's a ton of people who would be happy to take it from there.
Thanks.
Hey, just curious, for a team that's thinking about React versus Ionic, what would be your main argument for using React and not something like Ionic?
I'm not really sure how Ionic works. That's Angular, right?
So I'm not personally as familiar with it. It's another group on my team that I know is having this discussion now.
I mean, I've heard good things about Ionic. Obviously, I'm going to be partial to React Native. As far as that decision is concerned, I don't know enough about Ionic to weigh the scales, but my personal recommendation would be, if you guys have Angular developers and you're in an Angular shop, I'd go with Ionic. If you have React developers and your React shop, I'd go with React Native, just because that's what they're going to be productive in. There's going to be less of a onboarding and ramp up period. But that's not knowing anything about Ionic. So.
Sure.
The change in behavior that can happen on an over-the-air download, that kind of thing used to be an issue with the App Store. Did that change somewhere along the line? They used to.
It still is.
Oh.
Yeah. So there was some chatter a couple weeks back where they had an app that sort of did that, but it was for native apps, and they were changing the behavior of compiled code, which was a problem, and then that app got pulled as a result of using that. That's not a problem with React Native because it's not compiled code, it's interpreted.
Right, but I mean, you can really change the behavior of an entire app by how you change that interpreted code, and the requirements in the App Store don't cause a problem there?
You can't change your native bridged code over the air. So I think that's what makes the difference there. What they're doing when they do the App Store review is making sure that your native bridged code doesn't open up the possibility for shenanigans. So as long as you're not, you can't change that over the air.
Okay.
So generally speaking, unless you were very clever, it wouldn't be a problem.
Okay.
And I hope nobody gets that clever and screws it up for everybody.
So sometimes when you have like these sort of common languages that get rendered to a couple different platforms, that rendering is like sometimes buggy on one or the other. You need to test with multiple devices like you end up doing with responsive web. Is there any of that goes on with React Native?
Bugginess or testing?
So both. I mean, do you have the need to do like a run through on a bunch of different devices in order to see if what you're getting across platforms is similar or not?
Yeah. And at Walmart when we were doing React Native, we had this thing, Test Armada, right? And what that does is it, I think it was Sauce. I don't know, they spun up like a bunch of different virtual devices. Actually, I think they're real devices, right? But had this huge testing suite against it to see what it was on the different devices. And we do there's unit, functional, and then the device testing, right? And on the device testing, there is UI differences from time to time. I don't know what the current ones are. One of the weird ones is with a text element. Remember that text element there? And iOS, you could put padding on that and margin and stuff like that, whereas on Android, you can't. So, it's stuff like that it's like not really like buggy, but just like there's no direct equivalent as far as like the object property, right? So, iOS text has a padding and it's possible, where in Android it's not. So if you're developing for both, it's important to know the differences so that you put the padding on the container and not the text. Otherwise, you're going to see differences between the two.
So when you do the mobile web, you end up like loathing the like pixel pushing around stuff you have to do across platforms. Is that
loathing, you said?
Yeah, like it ends up being an abrasive part of the development experience. Do you find that this is like so
anytime you're on the
common
web,
that
it's.
So,
I mean,
so are you spending a lot of time that way with React, or is it like proportionally way less?
A lot of the stuff that I'm doing these days is pretty edge, right? So it's like your targets. I'm not supporting IE8 and IE9 anymore. So a lot of the CSS engines are in line at this point. So, if I'm sitting here, with, Flexbox on Edge browsers, you're pretty much in the clear. It's not like back in the day where, you're like, it doesn't work on IE8. Surprise, surprise. Everybody good? No questions? Whoa. It's just my background, don't even worry about it. I totally forgot to show some funny examples of React Native apps, so I'll do that before we wrap up here. And then I'll let you guys get out of here 10 minutes early. So this is, I made Duck Hunt with React Native. So that's kind of fun. You can make games. You can do really dumb things when you're not doing client work. Wasn't even that hard. This is actually all views and text, right? So that performance you're seeing is all with UI views and UI text, which is kind of like a hacky, shitty way to do it. But, it's not like it was for a client. It was for Saturday. And then with that snack thing with Expo, the first thing I did was I made Tinder, but just for me. It's called Kender. Doesn't matter where you swipe it. You just like me, and you're going to have to deal with it. So this is a really popular app in the App Store right now. And this is crazy. This is one of the funner things that I've done recently. I built a robot crossbow, and you control it with React Native, right? So this is all React-driven, everything, even the Arduino and all that stuff. It was really, really fun. So we use Bluetooth LTE technology to communicate between the Arduino and then move everything around and then shoot it. You guys actually want to see something? Do I have audio here? Like computer audio? I have a couple minutes. You guys want to see something hilarious? Yes. Okay. So, funny story. It's gonna be good. Where is that shit? I'll just go on YouTube. God damn it. No, I have it here, right? I don't know. So I gave this talk in London like 2 weeks ago, right? And it was about that. Yeah, it's me trying to get it set up, just like me right now. Yeah, so I made this whole thing, and then I called up this local army base, and I was like, hey, I kind of want to make this like 80s montage, like promo video for this thing. It'd be hilarious. And they're like, yeah, okay, come on down. I was like, that was easy. So I went down there, and they have all these like vintage computers and everything. So I took all these like sweet shots of it, and then they let me put this thing on top of like Hummers and everything like that. So for this talk, like I basically created this fictional defense contractor called Wheeler Defense Systems. And I had like shirts made and everything, and I made this promo video and showed it, and yeah, so yeah, let's do this. Fucking sweet logo. Some React Native in the wild. This was in London. Deal with it. Yeah, so I think you guys just saw the power of React Native firsthand. That's all I got.